He only stopped to rest. Just a quick break on a long drive. No crime, no warning, nothing unusual. But within minutes, flashing lights surrounded him, and strangers' suspicions turned into handcuffs. His dignity was stripped away in public. His voice silenced under accusations he didn't deserve. What began as an ordinary pause on the road became a night he would never forget. Yet what no one knew was that this man's story wasn't finished. And by the very next day, the power to decide their fate would belong to him. How did the tables turn so quickly? For most people, a highway rest stop is just a place to stretch, grab a snack, or take a moment to breathe. For Marcus, it was the same. He had been driving for hours, heading back from a late-night conference, his mind still heavy with the work he left behind. He wasn't thinking about trouble. He wasn't thinking about danger. Just coffee, maybe a few minutes of quiet, before the road swallowed him up again. Marcus was the kind of man who lived by routine, organized, steady, focused on building the career he had worked so hard for. To friends, he was dependable. To family, he was the rock. And to himself, he was simply a man who believed that if you worked hard and stayed out of trouble, the world would treat you fairly. But on that night, fairness had nothing to do with what was waiting for him. As he stepped out of his car, the cool night air didn't bring relief. It carried the weight of eyes that lingered too long. Eyes that judged, assumed, and prepared to act. Marcus didn't know it yet. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of headlights that didn't move. Marcus had pulled into a quiet corner of the rest stop, away from the big trucks and humming vending machines, just looking for a moment of peace. But when he stepped back toward his car with a cup of coffee in hand, the beams stayed fixed on him. "Where are you headed?" one asked sharply. Not a greeting, not even a hint of courtesy. Just a demand, delivered with suspicion. Marcus answered calmly, his voice steady, but his words seemed to dissolve in the cold air. The officers exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations where everything is decided without being said. A flashlight beam swept across his face, then down to his clothes, his car, his hands. "Step aside. We're going to need to check the vehicle." Marcus's heart pounded. He knew his rights, knew the laws, but he also knew the stories. He'd heard about the men who had spoken up, who had insisted on their dignity, and how quickly those encounters turned into headlines. His mind screamed to resist, to push back, but his body stayed still. His silence was the only shield he had. One officer circled the car, yanking the door open without permission, tossing aside the things Marcus had neatly arranged. Papers fluttered. "Traveling alone this late, huh? That's unusual," the other officer remarked, his tone laced with accusation. Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to explain, to insist that nothing was unusual about a man driving home after work. But he could feel it. They weren't looking for an explanation. They were looking for a reason. As Marcus was pushed into the back of the patrol car, his reflection caught in the window. For the first time, he saw himself as they saw him. Not as a professional, not as a man with a family waiting for him, but as a threat to be contained. The ride was silent, except for the crackle of their radios and the pounding of his... The cell was cold, but Marcus barely felt it. What burned was the humiliation. Hours earlier, he had been a free man, respected, on his way home from work. Now he sat on a hard bench with metal biting at his wrists, reduced to a booking number and a mugshot. The officers laughed outside the bars, their voices carrying through the hallway. To them, he wasn't a professional. He wasn't a son, a father, a man who had worked tirelessly to earn his place in the world. He was just another suspect, another body to fill the system. Marcus stared at the concrete floor, replaying every moment. The questions, the suspicion, the handcuffs closing without explanation. He wanted to scream, to demand his rights, but he knew the truth. His words wouldn't matter here. His skin had already spoken for him. Then came the knock. A heavy door creaked open, and a guard stepped inside. "You've got court in the morning," he muttered. Morning. The word echoed like thunder. Marcus's chest tightened. Tomorrow, he'd be forced to stand in front of strangers and defend himself against charges that didn't exist, accusations that weren't real, and yet, what choice did he have? As the night dragged on, Marcus sat in silence. His anger burned hotter than his fear. He thought of every time he'd told himself to stay calm, to stay professional, to rise above. But sitting in that cell, stripped of dignity, he wondered if rising above was even possible. The truth was clear now. No amount of hard work or respectability could shield him from being reduced to nothing in an instant. And yet, what the officers didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that the next morning, the courtroom was silent as Marcus entered, not in handcuffs, not as a defendant, but as the judge presiding over the very men who had arrested him. Their faces drained of color as they realized who now held the gavel. Iman, same man they had. But while those officers faced the weight of accountability, Marcus carried something heavier. The memory of every insult, every assumption, every cold stare that had led him here. He knew his experience wasn't unique. It was a chapter in a story written long before him. A story of countless men and women who had been judged not for their actions, but for their skin. And that's what made this moment bigger than him. His story was a reminder that racism doesn't always end in headlines. Sometimes it hides in rest stops, in flashing lights, in the quiet corners of the justice system where decisions are made before the truth is even heard. Marcus left the courtroom that day with his dignity restored, but also with a fire burning stronger than before. Because what happened to him could happen again, to anyone, anywhere, at any time. So the question isn't just about his story. The question is about ours. How many more Marcuses will there be? How many more lives interrupted, humiliated, or destroyed before we decide that enough